Missing persons cases are heartbreaking for all of those involved, and these cases often haunt the investigators that dedicate their lives to solving them. Although a missing person being found alive and well decades later is rare, sometimes reality really is stranger than fiction. Number 5. Ishinasuke Uwano was stationed on an island that's located in the Sea of Japan, but is controlled by the Russian Federation. Uwano was stationed there in 1958 following the end of World War II, and was a member of the Japanese Imperial Army. Sometime during 1958, his family made contact with him while he was still stationed on the island, and talked about how they eagerly awaited his return. However, this would be the last time they would hear from him for over 48 years. The exact details surrounding Uwano's disappearance are hazy, but some sources suggest that he may have been a Soviet prisoner of war and left on the island following the end of the war. Uwano did disclose that in 1965 when he moved to the Ukraine and started a new life for himself. He subsequently went on to marry a Ukrainian woman and had 3 children, all while his family back home in Japan believed that he'd been met with foul play. According to a USA Today article written in 2006, Uwano said that he'd been unable to return to Japan earlier due to the former Soviet regime, but declined to comment further on this. It wasn't until 2005 that his friends and the Ukrainian government learned the truth about him after he asked for help with contacting Japanese officials. After a lengthy interview, Uwano revealed the truth about how he had ended up in Ukraine. During the 48 years that Uwano had been missing, he'd been declared legally dead by the Japanese government, with his family just wanting closure on what had happened to their loved one. However, when the news broke that he'd finally been located safe and sound, they were overjoyed and couldn't wait to make up for lost time. His brother told USA Today, quote, "We are filled with emotions. We just can't express anything in words now." Uwano was so overcome that he couldn't even speak. Shortly after the news broke, the Japanese government agreed to fly him back home for a reunion, and for the first time in 60 years, Uwano stepped foot in Japan. Number 4. In 1966, Margot Freshwater's life would be turned upside down when she met Glenn Nash. Initially, Nash was acting as a lawyer for Freshwater's boyfriend who'd recently been arrested. As Freshwater and her boyfriend were both young adults at the time, neither of them had any money to pay for Nash's services, but Nash did agree to take the case on pro bono. But it seems that the relationship between Nash and Freshwater was much deeper than that of a lawyer and a client. In reality, Nash and Freshwater began an affair behind her boyfriend's back, and soon the couple were in love. Nash was convinced that the Memphis Bar Association was conspiring against him, when in reality, he was being investigated for misconduct. Nash was desperate to get out of Memphis, and with Freshwater by his side, the pair went on a killing spree that would take place across 3 states. After shooting 2 cashiers and a taxi driver, Freshwater and Nash were apprehended in Mississippi and charged with murder. However, during the trial, Nash was declared insane and was sentenced to serve his time at a mental institution instead of going to prison. Freshwater wasn't so lucky, and although the jury was unable to reach a verdict for 2 of the murders, she would be tried a 3rd time and sentenced to 99 years in prison. In 1970, Freshwater was a year and a half into her 99-year sentence when she decided that life in prison just wasn't going to cut it for her. With the help of another inmate, Faye Fairchild, the pair amazingly scaled the large prison fence and ran to safety. The 2 hitched rides and traveled as far as they could before going their separate ways. After her daring prison escape, Freshwater was listed as a missing person and placed on the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation's most wanted list. It wouldn't be until 32 years later that Margot Freshwater would reemerge in Columbus, Ohio, under the name Tanya McCarter. She was found after authorities had received an anonymous tip that Margot was known to have used the alias of Tanya before. They performed a search on driver's licenses using the name Tanya, Margot's date of birth, and physical description, and they came up with 2 possible matches, Tanya Hudkins and Tanya McCarter. They then tracked down Freshwater, who was living under the name of Tanya, and arrested her, much to the surprise of her friends and family. In the 32 years that she'd been missing, Freshwater had married and had 3 children. Her husband Daryl McCarter told Cleveland 19 News, quote, I feel like I know my wife well enough to know that she did not ever have the capability of doing that, and knowing her the time that I have and knowing her children, that could not have been possible. Freshwater was extradited back to Tennessee to face the courts. Luckily for her, Nash had confessed to being solely responsible for the murders to a jailhouse informant. The court accepted Freshwater's special guilty plea, and she was released from prison. Number 3. As the years ticked by, retired Fort Edward police officer Brian Pynchon wondered what had happened to his childhood best friend, Rick Hazelton. Hazelton was declared missing in 1986, and years after, his family made the heartbreaking decision to have him legally declared dead. But this didn't sit right with Pynchon, and he believed that there was much more to the story. Utilizing his years in the police force and the powerful connections that came with it, Pynchon enlisted the help of a detective in Nashville, Tennessee to help him find answers. During their research, they came across a sketch of a man who looked eerily like his old best friend, Rick Hazelton. Pynchon and the detective followed this lead, which led them to a man living in Oregon. Unable to do much more as it was out of their jurisdiction, they contacted the local police and asked them to intervene. It was at this point that Rick Hazelton received a letter that would shock him to his very core. Hazelton told Fox 8 Live News, quote, "One day I got a letter in the mail that said you're being investigated in a missing persons case. I thought that can't be right, I'm not missing, this has got to be a mistake. So I threw it in the garbage. 2 weeks later, the cops came to my door. It turns out that Rick Hazelton had been officially listed as a missing person for 33 years. In a state of shock, Hazelton explained to police that he was not missing and had left home all those years ago voluntarily. After leaving his home in Glens Falls, New York, Hazelton headed to New York City before going to Miami, Colorado, and eventually settling in Oregon. Hazelton told Spectrum News, quote, "Cell phones and social media weren't around back then, and I just fell out of touch with my friends and family. I didn't think anybody really cared, so I just made my own life." Pynchon and Hazelton have since reconnected and keep in regular contact, reminiscing about the good old days. Number 2. When Gabriel Naji of Newcastle, Australia failed to return home from his job on January the 21st, 1987, his family believed that they would never see him again. Amazingly, 23 years later, Naji walked back into the lives of his family just 2 weeks before he was about to be legally declared dead by the Australian courts. Just a day after he mysteriously vanished, his car was discovered on the side of the road, badly burned and wrecked from a crash. His family assumed that the worst had happened, and that he had either passed away or didn't want to be found. 2 weeks after he disappeared, Naji's card was used to withdraw money before the trail went cold for another 23 years. Before he could be legally declared deceased, the coroner performed at least one last sweep of the records when they came across a Medicare report under the name of Gabriel Naji. According to a hunch, the coroner contacted the hospital where the patient was registered, and after much back and forth, it was discovered that Gabriel, who had mysteriously vanished 23 years earlier, was in fact alive and well. He told the Australian Online, quote, "I've been living under a pseudonym for a long time, but I'd been having flashes of my proper name. Things were slowly returning to me." Naji revealed to investigators that he'd been living a transient lifestyle and had taken up odd jobs around Queensland in order to survive. After being located, he was assessed by medical professionals who believed that he suffered from a dissociative disorder caused by a head injury. This rare psychiatric disorder gives sufferers memory loss, leading to them running away and starting a new life, completely forgetting about the family they have at home. Naji has since been reunited with his family and is making up for lost time. Number 1. In 1961, Alaskan-born Canadian woman Lucy Ann Johnson mysteriously vanished after being seen at the 10,300 block of 145A Street in British Columbia. It wouldn't be until 1965 that she was officially reported missing by her husband, Marvin Johnson. The fact that Marvin had waited 4 years to report his wife missing immediately set off alarm bells, and investigators performed an excavation in the garden of the home, but nothing was ever found. As the years passed by, Lucy's case grew colder and colder, and the attention surrounding her disappearance slowly dwindled. But there was one person who never gave up hope, and that was Lucy's daughter, Linda. Linda was just a child when her mother went missing, but she never stopped looking for her, pleading with investigators to perform DNA tests on Jane Doe's and keep her profile in the system. In 2013, Lucy's case was featured by the RCMP in their Missing of the Month series. After the series aired, Linda was able to get a hold of documents that revealed her mother must have gone to Yukon. Linda placed an ad in the Yukon News saying, quote, "I'm looking for my relatives. My grandparents' names are Margaret and Andrew Carvel. My mother's name is Lucy Ann Carvel. She was born October 14, 1935. The ad paid off, and Linda was contacted by a woman named Rhonda from Whitehorse, Yukon, who told her that the woman in the photograph was her mother, making them half-sisters. After 52 years of being missing, Lucy Johnson was located alive and well and living in Yukon. Linda and Lucy were reunited after 52 long years of being apart. After the shock and anxiety had subsided, Linda then asked her mom the all-important question of why. In a CBC article, Linda said, quote, "She told me that my dad was really abusive to her and that he was running around with another woman. She said that he told her to get out and she went back to get us, but my dad said, 'You're not taking the kids,' and that was the end of that. She never tried again." Linda is now working on rebuilding her relationship with her mother and getting to know all of her half-brothers and sisters in Yukon. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked this video, be sure to click that like button. Also, don't forget to subscribe and click that notification bell to keep up to date with all of our future uploads. But I've been Ty Knotts, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.